Welcome everyone to this FWR webinar, Integrated Water Management and Sustainable Economic Growth. This webinar today is going to be presented by Dr. Jonathan Fisher. Jonathan is a freelance environmental economist with more than 45 years' experience of delivering practical applied economic analyses of environmental matters, including 24 years on water and flood risk management. Up until 2014, he was economics manager at the Environment Agency, where he was responsible for economic analysis and advice on water and flood risk management in England. And before then, he was the Department of the Environment's economic advisor on climate change and participated in the early work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. After that, he was an economic advisor at the UK Treasury and worked as an economist in the Environmental Directorate of the OECD. As always with our webinars, there will be the chance for questions at the end of Jonathan's presentation, so please do submit these using the Q&A option, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. You can do this at any point during the presentation, and I'll then read those out on your behalf later on. A massive thank you to Jonathan for presenting today. I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethny, and good midday, everyone, and welcome. Hopefully you can all see the presentation okay, and let Ethny know if you can't, and I'm sure she'll sort something out. So what we're going to talk about today is integrated water management and economic growth. Context is the new government's key objective is striving for increased economic growth. And the purpose of the webinar is to examine the impacts of integrated water management on economic growth and identify how to enhance it with the aim to input into the spending review, which is currently going on, and where I presume helping to achieve economic growth is going to be one of the key criteria that a bid has to demonstrate its achievement of. And the context essentially is that the government semi-wisely takes the view that achieving economic growth is the only best feasible way of getting out of the dire public finance they've inherited from the previous government. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the government's 7 drivers of economic growth, and I'm then going to focus on 2 key aspects. One is water infrastructure, water supply and sewage treatment, and look into the causes of the dire state of our water infrastructure and the extent to which it's constraining economic development, and hence the need for integrated water management. I'm then going to move on to look at the question of environmental regulations and reducing burdens on business, with a hope that we can input into the DEFRA regulation review that they've launched by Dan Corrie. And effectively what he will do, or DEFRA will do, for DEFRA, is explore whether DEFRA regulators are equipped to drive economic growth, secure private sector investment and protect the environment, customer stakeholder experience, and look at the efficiency of regulation, duplication, contradiction, and opportunities for improvement. Essentially, they're aiming to position DEFRA as a growth department with regulatory reform, looking for pragmatic solutions and cutting red tape. So this is very similar to what I encountered in 2011 after the financial crash or crisis of 2007, when the then coalition government, DEFRA, DEC, and DTI produced a joint report on enabling the transition to a green economy, and DEFRA wanted to be seen as a department for growth. So what I did is to dust off the briefing I did at the Environment Agency for that, and also the report I wrote in 2009 on a strategy for a sustainable economic recovery in a decade of difficulty. And actually, I think the problems are worse now. So I'm going to go from there to look at the Department for Business and Trade's 7 behaviors of smarter regulation and look at how the features of integrated water management, and particularly the Water Framework Directive regulations, tie up with those. And I'm going to conclude with some key requirements to enhance the impacts of integrated water management on economic growth. I have a fuller assessment of these matters in a paper that's forthcoming on the FWR website, and there's the link there, and it'll be, Ethny will produce that in due course, well, soon, the next week or so. So starting with the government's 7 drivers in economic growth. 2011 they had 5, but now they've got 7. I'm going to focus on the ones in bold, which is infrastructure and investment and environmental sustainability. I'm not quite sure what they mean by environmental sustainability, but I'll interpret it in the way I think in terms of infrastructure. But also looking at the effects of regulation on innovation, efficiency, productivity, and businesses. So starting with the dire state of our water infrastructure, starting with water supply, on the right-hand side, you've got the findings of Water Resources Southeast on the lack and the shortfall that we face for water supply going forward to 2075. And these are the main drivers behind that shortfall, partly climate change, partly population. And that even now is causing significant problems and is constraining economic development, experiencing Cambridge and also Southeast Water. And I'd welcome any other ones that people on the line have for experience on that. There's a similar issue regarding sewage treatment capacity, which is constraining housing and economic development, and an example at Oxford there. And of course is generating unacceptable discharges of raw sewage, which I won't go into, but I think you probably know all about it. But that's prompted the DEFRA's remedial storm overflow discharge reduction plan with an horrendous cost of 56 billion, which I think is also crowding out other integrated water management measures, certainly in the recent business plans of the water companies. So the need for integrated water management comes very high and very important. And there's an interesting recent 2024 Case for Cambridge report in response to the problems at Cambridge, calling for a mixture of major water supply infrastructure in the area and innovative water management in agriculture, nature-based solutions, increased water efficiency, reuse, and a water credit system. So it's an integrated process, and similar in some respects to what WRC was proposing, but slightly more specific and more in terms of specific aspects of on the efficiency side. In the past, I had some information on where, as a result of improved water efficiency, certainly there was a case in that the agency with PepsiCo increased water efficiency of their farm businesses to cut their consumption by 30%. And that enabled them to have enough supply to grow in a resource sustainable way in a constrained catchment to expand their food manufacturing operations. And the Natural Capital Committee in 2014 had a similar example for Walker's Crisps. And if anyone has any more recent experience and evidence, welcome that in the follow-up discussions. So this is some evidence recently on the causes of the problem. Imperial College study that increased sewage discharges are due to chronic undercapacity of wastewater systems and the combined sewer overflows. an inability to handle the increased sewage loads that they're now facing. And the same was done with Justice Holgate in his judicial review, that 60% of sewage overflows are due to lack of capacity to handle increased population and also impermeable paving. Also, Ofwat's recent review of 3 water companies declared that they were not properly operating and maintaining their wastewater treatment works. They were failing to upgrade the assets to meet the changing needs of the areas they serve, with 67% of Thames Water's wastewater treatment plant works have capacity and operational issues, and that they failed to monitor local population growth and urban creep. And this is a quote from their Director of Enforcement, that they haven't been curious enough for keeping an eye on their assets and capacity issues. And I'll come back to that, looking at the sort of population housing questions. So, where are we now? Up to 2015, the water companies spent billions on upgrading their infrastructure to comply with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Wastewater Treatment Directive, effectively upgrading the plants, installing new plant, holding tanks. And that was supposed to provide a water infrastructure that was fit for the 21st century. And evidently, we don't have one now that is fit for where we are now in the 2020s, 2030s. This is 4 major reasons. Well, no, 5 major reasons for it, sorry. One is insufficient and adequate monitoring and enforcement by the Environment Agency in the wake of severe cuts in 2015 for water management at operational catchment level. I did a review, I downloaded my brain of evolution of water management over the last 25 years, which was improving well up to 2015 and then has been seriously deteriorating. And Fergal Sharkey, when I showed it to him, said, well, you know what happened in 2015? There was a Secretary of State called Liz Truss, who cut the Environment Agency's grant and aid budget by 58%, and they've never really recovered from that. Following on from that is the water company's poor monitoring and operational management, which Ofwat have highlighted, and insufficient capital maintenance. Plus also, as we showed earlier, inadequate infrastructure to cater for increased housing. Effectively, and I've been involved in some local planning issues, the local planning authorities have failed to make developers pay for their full cost of additional water supply and treatment costs. Effectively, the planners ask the water companies, can you provide the water and can you provide the sewage treatment? They have a statutory duty to do so. They say yes, they have to say yes, and that's the end of the story, but they don't enforce the full payment, as a result of which those costs have to be borne and cross-subsidized by all water bill payers. And with the pressure to contain water bills, there's been insufficient investment in infrastructure. And hence we face in the current round, more than £100 billion worth of expenditures now by the water companies to get their infrastructure back up to speed. So that's the dire position we face on infrastructure. I'll now move on to regulation, and I'll start with busting 2 myths and false claims. One is that regulations are a barrier to economic growth, and removing regulation, environmental regulations and burning of regulations would boost growth. The environmental regulation costs are low. Overall, they're a fraction of % of turnover. To specific sectors like agriculture, they're about 3%, and this is based on 2015 DEFRA data that I looked at a while ago. And DEFRA then concluded that the weight of evidence suggests that there is no significant economic impact of environmental regulation. Conversely, it is claimed by some that environmental regulations increase growth through increased expenditures. And that's also not true, because those expenditures had to be paid by businesses. And some people pray in aid Porter's work. And so I looked at that specifically, and actually his real conclusion is that better environmental regulation processes to reduce costs and adverse economic impacts can improve economic growth. So what he did was develop principles for how to improve the impacts of environmental regulations on economic growth. And I then developed that into a full set of principles in a book that I and a number of EA alumni downloaded our brains on developments in environmental regulation. And I wrote the section on economics in that. And I hope that those principles and that experience and evidence can input into the CORI review as can today. So I'll now move on to the Department of Trade, Business and Trade has come up with 7 behaviors of smarter regulation, which are listed 1 to 7 on the left-hand side there. And what I'll do is go through various features of Water Framework Directive regulations that relink fairly well to those categories. And also, this is there is a fuller version in the paper that's coming and the book as to how the Water Framework Directive regulations link really well up with the principles from Porter and myself for improving the impacts of environmental regulations on economic growth. So what you get with the Water Framework Directive is a clear regulatory framework to set out long-term outcomes goal of aiming to achieve good ecological status. Having that framework helps innovative responses. There's flexibility in determining integrated measures to achieve those objectives over in a series of 6-year plans. And those 6-year processes also can help both improve innovation, but also make more efficient responses. In 2015, they were implemented well by experienced catchment managers and who were business aware. A lot of that capacity and experience has now gone with those cuts, and I'll come back to how that needs to be remedied. It specifically allows for exemptions on if the requirements are disproportionately expensive, which links well with issues of proportionate, efficient, responsive regulation by the DBT. It promotes market-based solutions. It has a process of collaborating with stakeholders through the catchment hosts for the development now of river basin management plans. It is internationally aware. It was called the English Directive on the continent because it was developed by British experts collaboratively with European colleagues for application in all countries and hopefully to reduce trade distortions for water subsidies. And it sets out consistent requirements in the river basin plans, which I would hope are consistent, transparent, and accountable. Oops, what have I done? And it has a system for setting out those assessments of costs and benefits in qualitative, quantitative, and monetary terms that when we develop those regulations. So that's the context, and I'll now move on to conclusions and start with requirements to enhance the impacts of integrated water management on sustainable growth. And first and foremost is to restore the Environment Agency's capacity and capability for integrated water management at catchment levels, which has been decimated by the Liz Truss cuts in 2015. That hopefully will enable them to restore their capability, but also their business awareness, and that will help link, as I said earlier, to one of the key categories in the smarter regulation requirements. Now, the water bill currently going through Parliament gives new powers to recover the agency's costs of their enforcement and provide resources for it to hold polluters to account. What I'm suggesting here is that those powers, with a suitable amendment, should be expanded to cover more of the agency's work on water permitting, monitoring, and the development of water resource management plans, river basin plans, and effectively the process of determining integrated water management. And essentially, because that will lead to efficiency benefits, lower abatement costs, and also the costs of that administrative process is a fraction of businesses' abatement costs. So fundamentally, it makes very good value for money. So moving on to the wider area, as I said, one of the problems with the water infrastructure is that it hasn't kept pace with the major housing developments. And it's led to the problems we face now of sewage discharges and lack of water supply. So there's a proposal here that local planning authorities need to make sure major new housing developments pay fully for their costs of additional sewage treatment and water supply and managing flood risks. Now, at the moment, the national NPPF, National Planning Guidance, does require LPAs to take account of water and water supply and wastewater treatment matters. So hopefully they will need to implement that. And I think, and what we have, what we have on the right-hand side is some analysis that was done for my local borough on their community infrastructure levy and the costs of development. And what you have on the right-hand side is various elements of costs of development. And the little line in the middle of blue is the current provisions for community infrastructure levy for various housing, transport, and water, but it's not there. And the red bit is the cost of land, the price they pay for effectively development of agricultural land. And I would advocate that if that community infrastructure levy, effectively, if the infrastructure levy is properly paid for, that should reduce what I would see as an excessively high premium in some parts of the country for the development of agricultural land, and wouldn't necessarily lead to an increase in the price of affordable houses in developments. So moving on to the regulation side, we need to reduce and contain the burden on business through better integrated water management, following the principles with proportionate, flexible, targeted and efficient measures over well-defined timescales, and then provide the clear regulatory environment needed for business investment. Now, given the dire state of public finances, the Environment Agency needs to streamline its river basin planning integrated management processes. And hopefully this can be picked up in the Corrie review as to how to do that and integrate and be efficient. And a couple of suggestions on my side. One is to revert to the 80 catchments they had in the River Basin Management Plan. Effectively, there's thousands of water bodies that need management in England and Wales, or England, which is too many to be able to do the necessary appraisals for each of them, which is why in 2015, the agency brigaded those into 80 catchments at which they could develop the plans accordingly. In the last round, they've expanded that to a large number of many sub-catchments in the third round of river basin planning, which is effectively too many for the agency to cover and provide the necessary technical assessment of pressures, options, cost effectiveness, and an assessment of costs and benefits of those options. So I'm suggesting it's done at 80 rather than the many now, and that they focus the work first by looking at the cost effectiveness, and you then focus on, from the cost effectiveness, you identify what's obviously too expensive or what's obviously worthwhile, the bleeding obvious, and you have a rump in the middle that you focus your further detailed assessment of their costs and benefits to determine how to take those forward. The next one is use of market-based instruments and economic instruments in water and flood risk management. There are a number out there, a fair amount of experience, and a need to take those and promote those further. And finally, this should lead to the promotion of the environmental goods and services sector through a stable regulatory environment from 0.5 above, and clear long-run signals on the scale and significance of current and future environmental problems and opportunities that sector needs to exploit and pursue to tackling them more efficiently. So thank you. Back to you, Ethny.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was a really, really interesting and useful presentation, looking at the links between integrated water management and sustainable economic growth. So thank you very much for that. We're going to move straight into the Q&A session now. So if any of our attendees have questions, please do put them in the Q&A box for Jonathan. I'll kick off with the first one now.
I've seen it.
Oh, great. So yeah, you said that as of 2015, environmental regulation costs were around 0.2% of turnover. Do you have any idea what this figure is like now?
I don't, I'm afraid. It was based, it's in the book. So this presentation will be available with the links, Ethny. So yeah, go into the book. It was based on a detailed study that DEFRA did into 2015 on costs of a wide range of environmental regulations and sectors. I don't know if they've done an update, and would welcome if people do know. I welcome it, but I'm afraid I don't. Yeah, have a look at the book, and either way, it's not a commercial bid because the royalties go to WaterAid.
Thank you, Jonathan.
But I can send the necessary chapters if you don't want to buy the book.
Thank you. That's great. I also wondered, so one of your points in your presentations was around the need for more capacity and capability within the Environment Agency in order to deliver integrated water management. So how do you think those things can be addressed? Obviously, there's the issue of finance, but what other areas of capacity and capability do you think need to be built within the agency?
Well, a load of experience walked out the door in 2015, and that needs to be recovered. But there is a load of still experience there. There's a load of mentoring that should and could go on. There's a lot of wise old people that they can pull on for advice. And ex-agency people do work for free quite merrily. And I think partly practice, partly having the systems there that are feasible, worthwhile, but also at the moment, I think the agency's been through a very depressed period, and having a more positive attitude towards environmental regulation, the importance of their work, will actually do a lot to encourage people to join and develop, and also enable them to develop their work and feel properly appreciated, as I think we used to. but I get the impression that they're very hard pressed and have felt rather downtrodden, and I think they need get the respect they and their work deserves.
Great, thank you.
And probably less of a tick box mentality and more of a trying to look wider at the problem, options, and not be afraid to present and discuss them and come to the best conclusions. The people in 2015 did come up with a lovely logo for the economic appraisal work, which was done by technical economics managers, and they came up with "We Love Economics," which an economist would never dare do. But essentially it enables people to set out the reasons for why they come to the trade-offs that they face, which are quite difficult trade-offs, but need being explicitly handled.
Great, thank you. That kind of links to another question, which is around so the benefits of something like integrated water management is that you can get multiple benefits for different areas of society, whether it's economic growth, supporting development, but also improving biodiversity and climate change resilience. How do you think we can get a better understanding of some of the multiple benefits of these types of management approaches? And how can that feed into kind of their growth, their wider use in society?
I think we need to go back to the ecosystem services assessment side and effectively the payments for ecosystem services. So working through what those benefits are in terms of what you described, and covering them in I would say first qualitative, but then quantitative and a so what way. So you get quantitative and monetary as to their significance. And then setting those out, and the sort of, I didn't go into payments for ecosystem services, which I probably should have done, but having a link between the beneficiaries, be it downstream people suffering from flooding, to the provisions of them, which is upstream land use holders, and getting the links between those through the payments for ecosystem services. And there's various processes like LENS, which I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's how you handle and getting those payments and bringing the beneficiaries and the producers of those services together, such that you get the payments and you get the delivery accordingly. And then putting them together into having an integrated framework for doing it, such that the sum is bigger than the parts. And at the moment, I worry that in the last few years we've gone back to what I would call silo-based targets, and we need to move away from those to the more integrated catchment management processes, of which river basin planning, flood risk management planning, bringing us calling something different, maybe integrated management planning, to bring those together. And then that will enable them to come and be seen, and therefore they'll change the options. And the whole process should be refining the options to come up with better integrated options.
And do you think the catchment-based kind of partnership approach is going to be important for that?
I think it's essential. And I'd hope, DEFRA is doing a root and branch review of the water sector, and I would hope that would be one of the key items to come out of it. But it does require capacity and capability, and it needs and I think the Environment Agency should be at the core of that. It's been sidelined too much.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. It looks like that's all the questions that are coming through. So I'll kick off with the outro, but if anyone has any other questions, please do drop them in because we've got a bit of time to answer them if needed. But a massive thank you to you, Jonathan, for presenting. That was really interesting. We look forward to seeing the publication on that. As you mentioned, a link can be sent to everyone for that. And thanks to all our attendees as well for coming. I hope you found that as useful and informative as I did. If you are an IES member, please do record your attendance at this webinar using our CPD tool on our website. And you can do this by logging in to the members area. If you're also interested in finding out more about the FWR, Foundation for Water Research, please do get in touch with me. There are many ways you can get involved, and we recently launched the brand new FWR website. This webinar has been recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel. And the next FWR event is taking place on the 31st of October, and is an FWR water climate discussion based on concepts of radical change, with this one looking at reverse water cycles. And you can register for this on the FWR website. It looks like that's everything for today. So thanks again, Jonathan, for your time. And thanks to all of you. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Oh, wait, one's just literally it's just a comment from someone saying that they're going to get in touch with you, Jonathan, to provide a little bit of a case study for consideration as well.
Oh, thank you, Simon. I'll look forward to that. You've got my email address. Fine. Brilliant.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.